Hey, Scholarly Communication fans, it's David Ehrensperger, direct from the Christine and Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Library on Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's Prescott, Arizona campus once again. As always, I manage the Prescott campus's portion of Scholarly Commons, Embry-Riddle's institutional repository, and that online resource is one of the places that scholarly communication happens at this institution. This is episode 4 of our podcast, Embry-Riddle Prescott's Scholarly Communication Corner, and for those of you following this podcast, you will have noted that the episodes are still not being released in order. That much has not changed. Another thing that hasn't changed is that we are recording this episode to celebrate Open Access Week 2018, and my guest is Laura Pope Robbins, Associate Library Director for Access Services here at the Hazy Library, and she is our local expert pertaining to and all-around advocate for open access materials. Laura, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
How are you today on this wonderful Open Access Week debut?
I am quite excited about open access. I think it's a wonderful thing.
One of the reasons I asked you to participate in the podcast is that you are passionate about open access, and it's clear, and you see it as a good thing for faculty, for students. And why? I guess this is the best question to ask. Is like, what is it about open access that inspires you so much?
Well, it inspires me because open access means that articles and books that are published are immediately available to use by everyone, and they're free.
Free?
Free.
Okay, that's good. Now, is this just to the end user, or is it to the authors, or how does that work?
Well, it is free for the end users to use and to repurpose and to distribute. The thing to keep in mind with open access is that the authors do retain their copyright.
Okay, so that's good. Now, speaking of copyright, we've heard a lot about copyright. And say, you buy a book from Amazon or something like that. You have this book that is published by Elsevier. Now, how does that differ from open access?
Whenever an author or a creator creates something, they are automatically endowed with copyright for that item, which means that they control what other people can do with their creation. Traditionally, get a work published, to work with someone like Elsevier Press, an author enters an agreement with that publisher, and often they transfer some of their copyright rights to the publisher. Things like allowing them to distribute it and to copy their work so that they can make a profit off of it.
Right, so the publisher essentially makes the lion's share of the profits, but they do it by distributing the work, things like that. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, there are these copyrighted works, and then there are these open access works. If someone submits something via open access, they essentially, what you're saying is they retain the rights that would otherwise be given away to publishers.
Yes.
Okay. Now are there different types of open access?
There are. Most people who use open access or who publish through open access will apply something called a Creative Commons license to their work. And the Creative Commons license basically defines what uses they'll allow the public at large to make of their work.
Right. So the most basic one is just attribution.
Yes, that's CC BY is what you would see on a publication. And that means you can use my work whatever way you want to, but you have to give me credit for it.
Right. And then there are others where you have to use it in just the way I present it. If I'm the copyright owner. And some say you can't make money off it, and some say it's okay. And there are various variations. But essentially what open access does is allows the author to essentially decide.
Yeah, to maintain control of their work and decide how it will be used and whether it can be sold or distributed for free. And they maintain all of their copyright in that work and have not given anything away by putting the Creative Commons license on it and putting it. And some creators will even go so far as to put what's called CC0 or CC0, on the work, which means they're putting this into the public domain, making it freely available for everyone to use in whatever way that they want and does not require attribution.
Okay, so that is pretty much the most flexible
That is
licensing.
the most open access you can get.
Wow. Okay, great. Well, okay, it's good to know that we have the distinction between copyright and Creative Commons and open access. Now, there are these things called Open Education Resources, or OER,
Mhm.
and would you make a distinction between open access and OER for the purposes of this podcast?
Well, I would say that open educational resources are a specific type of open access work. They are works created by teachers and others with an interest in education and are basically defined as anything that can be used for teaching, learning, or research that reside within the public domain or have been released under a Creative Commons license that allows free use and free repurposing.
In essence, OER allows faculty to repurpose what either, basically what they create, obviously, but also
Mhm.
what they find.
Exactly.
Okay, so
And it allows them to share their teaching materials with the world so that newer teachers can learn from them and use their work.
right now, what's the impact on students for this?
What is the impact on students for this? Well, it can be wonderful. What I have been pushing very strongly for are open educational resource textbooks. And there are thousands of textbooks out there that are freely available and are updated by faculty members around the world. And if students are allowed to use those instead of traditional textbooks, we are saving them a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah, one of the things just remembering back to my own days of buying textbooks for courses. Yeah, it was a lot of money then, and the textbook costs have only gone up.
Yes, they have. And you know publishers, they will change one sentence, one paragraph. They issue a new edition and expect everyone to buy the new edition.
Right, and sometimes, oftentimes it's a little more drastic than that, but yeah, the point is well taken. The main content of the book remains the same, and yet the new edition costs an additional textbook fee.
Yes.
In terms of students actually having textbooks, having to purchase textbooks that cost hundreds of dollars is what we call a disincentive. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would.
And one reason faculty members might want to have, students have an open access textbook is that they could say, here, go download it, and students really have no excuse, right? Pretty much?
Exactly. And we have a variety of some open access textbooks within our catalog so that students can download them. And we actually purchased a few because the open educational resources ones, those textbooks generally cost maybe $25. So we have some hard copy versions of some of those.
Right. Well, and it's always good to be able to pick a book up and, see how good it is, because, not everyone likes to read online, fine. So,
exactly.
But a $25 textbook is much better than, say, a $200 textbook or something that costs even more.
Oh, yeah. Well, I did a study last year, spring 2017, looking at some of our most heavily taken courses and the new textbook cost. I looked at the number of students, what the new textbook cost would be, and found that for about 5 different classes, students could have saved overall over $300,000.
$300,000?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a few classes in one semester.
Yes.
Holy cow. Okay.
And that's, the total population of those students who were buying the textbooks. Not that each student would save $300,000, but each student was going to save more than $200 apiece.
Right, and when you multiply that out in terms of overall class numbers, it adds up really quickly.
Yes.
Okay, so that is what you would call compelling reasons to purchase OER. And so, and again, OER, or Open Education Resources, are a subset of open access materials, which is what we're celebrating during this Open Access Week.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, going back to open access and its overall importance, how important is it in the context of traditional publishing?
Well, I think it's extremely important. There are a number of issues with traditional publishing that have simply grown over time and grown with the introduction and growth of the internet itself. Because a lot of times what traditional publishing does is lock away research that was publicly funded through governmental grants. It's research that the public's basically already paid for, but they have to pay to get access to it yet again.
Right.
Through either a subscription database or to wait for when the embargo period ends.
Right. Yeah. And actually, one of the things I've noted is that, like for NSF grants and things like that, there is sort of an open access publishing requirement, or making things publicly available. And open access is one way to do that.
Right. But you'll still find that researchers are publishing in these journals that say, well, it's going to be embargoed for a year or 6 months or 18 months or 2 years before we'll release it to the public. And most of the public don't realize that if they went to a public university or they went to their local library, that their library could obtain that article for them, I'd like to say for free, but there are some public libraries that charge for interlibrary loan. But most of them just search it, they find the article, and then they're hit with this paywall that says, well, you can have access for $35, $50, and it's not cheap, and it's not right, because they've already contributed to the funding of that article.
Right. Okay. So there's this whole environment of contributing to funding. And what we said before, I mean, what you mentioned is that open access is free.
Exactly.
So essentially what a person could do is go to like the directory of open access journals and do a search and click on a link and actually get the content we're looking for.
Yes. And that is huge. That is huge, because opening up the articles means you're opening it up to many more people around the world who might have something to contribute to the research and the ongoing growth of what's being learned. And if you lock it behind paywalls, then those people don't have access and can't help discover new things.
Pretty much, yeah. Very well put. I could not have said it better myself. So we have this open access environment, and we have a faculty member who's looking to publish her work. For that faculty member, what are the best reasons for her to publish in this open access journal, open access environment?
When you think about being a faculty member and publishing, many publish because it's part of what you do to gain tenure, to get a promotion, and they have to publish in what are called, peer-reviewed journals, things that have vetted their research. But effectively, when they go to it with a traditional publisher, they are donating that work for publication just to get it out there and to prove that they are doing the work that they need to and that their work is important. Open access, though, publishing in an open access journal means that they'll actually be able to disseminate their work to a much wider audience. And it means that their research can be built upon and expanded much more quickly. And it means that they may find new collaborators that they didn't know about because everything was locked behind the walls. There are over 9,000 open access journals, many of which are peer-reviewed, which faculty could be publishing in instead.
Okay, now what are the things faculty members pay attention to as impact factor?
Right.
And a lot of open access journals and publications are somewhat new, and they haven't had time to develop impact factor, or a way to measure it. And so what would you say to faculty members in that regard?
There are some that have been around for quite some time, like the Public Library of Science publishers, PLOS. Right. They can measure impact factor as one place. Another thing that they can think about in terms of measuring the usefulness of their work is when you publish in an open access journal, not only are you allowed to put your work in that journal, but you can put it in your own school's institutional repository. The more places you can actually publish the work, the more you're disseminating it and increasing the odds that it will be found using a search engine like Google Scholar, or what is the Microsoft equivalent? Bing Academia, something like that.
Right.
And you open that up and you open it through institutional repositories, suddenly you're not just measuring traditional metrics. You're using number of downloads. You're able to see how many times it's been mentioned in social media. You have a whole new set of metrics that you can pull on to measure your impact.
Yes, and just to put in a plug for Scholarly Commons, our own institutional repository, our abstracts are searchable on Google Scholar, Google in general, and we have a lot of those additional metrics, Plumex, and we have this additional level of accessibility. So even if works are archived somewhere else, I like to say it's arxiv.org.
Mm-hmm.
It's a physics repository. They could be put in Scholarly Commons as well.
Exactly. And the more places you put it, the more times it gets indexed and the higher ranking it will receive in the search engines.
And the greater impact the faculty members will have on their discipline.
Yes.
That's good to know, and I'm glad we're saying it here because, this is one of the key aspects of open access. We could put out a sign, make your work more discoverable, or something like that. So now, there is a quality issue about open access content sometimes. There has been in the news, I've heard of predatory open access journals. So what would you say to faculty members about that?
Well, I would say if you're going to decide to publish open access and you're looking for a journal, you want to look at the directory of open access journals, you want to look at Beall's list of predatory journals and publishers, and you want to talk to your librarian to figure out which journals are going to be the most beneficial for you. And predatory journals are journals that, well, basically they're charging you to publish, and they're not being honest about necessarily peer review or anything else. They're just asking you to pay to get your work published and pay to keep it maintained there.
Right. Actually, I remember doing some research on a predatory journal. Or actually, it was a journal that I was trying to figure out whether it was predatory. And the way I figured out that it was is that I went to their website and then looked at their editorial board. Okay, fine. And they seemed to have very impressive qualifications. So I went to the places where they said they were, basically, Professor X said she was affiliated with Department X at this one institution. So I go there, and oddly enough, that person wasn't listed in the faculty, or was listed as an adjunct, or something to that effect. And what seemed like really great qualifications for an editorial board turned out to be rather empty. And it's a matter of doing due diligence on where you want to publish your work. And again, talk to the librarian. That's what we do.
Exactly. We want you to publish in the right place. We want to help you get there.
Yes, we do. In terms of positive impact of open access on the environment, you touched on it before, but it's one of those things that since we're celebrating open access, it bears repeating. So what is the most positive impact of open access on students, on faculty, and on Embry-Riddle?
Okay, big one there. Okay,
yeah.
So positive impact on students would be the number and quality of resources available to them, for one, because it's not simply a matter of articles or books, but also data sources. So data sources give them real-world research to learn from, experiment with, and even maybe expand upon. Freeing them from course packs and textbooks saves them thousands of dollars, which can be put to better use in their education. Those colleges, and there are a few colleges that have actually implemented complete OER degrees, have found that it's increased student retention and brought them many more new students and a higher satisfaction with degrees by students. So that's a huge thing. Giving students access to current research, because open access means the research is available immediately. Means they can find the most relevant research for them to learn from, and gives them a leg up when they graduate because they know what's currently being done. Open access gives them the best education possible because it keeps their faculty current with the most up-to-date research as well. And it means you can follow citations and actually get to the resources and not just hit paywalls and dead ends.
So what you're saying, it's more bang for the buck?
Yes. Much more bang for the buck. For faculty, it lets them grow their network, it lets them involve their students, and there are faculty out there who are creating OER with their students, and I think that's huge because that's bringing students right into the academic process and giving them a taste of whether they want to eventually move into academia themselves or not. For faculty, they can also see the positive impact of their research more quickly. They can track how often it's downloaded. They can track how often it's cited. If it's open access, it's available more quickly because it's available the moment you put it up. That means you're going to get cited more quickly also because it's being accessed. By putting it in the institutional repositories, it's much easier to track downloads and to actually see where in the world people are accessing their research from, which is, I think, is a fascinating thing to track.
Right. We have that capability on Scholarly Commons, and yeah, it's interesting to see because it's an interactive map, and every time something's downloaded, there's a little ball that appears, and it moves for every different download, and it's very interesting to see where it comes out.
Exactly, and even if your work isn't cited, it's being downloaded, so it's being used, even if not cited. So there's a lot more ways to measure their impact and their research.
Now, one group I didn't include in my question was administrators. As far of all the administrators I know, many are interested in the idea of student retention. Could you speak a little bit about that? Just a little.
Ooh, a little bit about retention. Okay, I can tell you about Tidewater Community College was having problems with retention. Small community college, you would think it would be more accessible and easier to keep your students involved, but it wasn't. And textbooks were a big part of it because students couldn't afford the textbook. If you can't afford the textbook, you're not going to do as well in your course. So either they were failing or they were dropping out. So what they did was they introduced a zero-cost textbook degree. And for that particular degree program, everything used open access materials and open educational resources. And they saw their enrollment skyrocket. They saw students stay in the program and graduate. Their retention went up, I think, at least by 30%.
Oh my.
And students were happier and more committed to the program. So saving students dollars helps to increase their happiness, helps to keep them in the program. And there have been studies that have shown that students, if they can't afford the textbook, may not take the class. And if you can't take a class that's required, you can't finish your degree.
So what you're saying is that the whole idea of open access, open educational resources translates into real-world impact.
Yes,
okay.
It does. You get alumni instead of students who didn't finish.
And that, I think, is that's a great way to close the conversation. I mean, what more can you say? In terms of an educational environment, that's what we want.
Yes, we do. Because alumni come back and they help students who are continuing on, help them with internships, help them with knowledge, and give a helping hand.
Okay, well, again, Laura, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners do too. Are there any final words of wisdom you would impart?
Final words of wisdom. Well, I would say that people need to start really looking at open access and embracing it. And since we have Scholarly Commons, our own institutional repository here on campus, which provides open access, I think it's something that they should get themselves involved with.
I definitely agree. And one thing about these podcasts is that they will be archived in Scholarly Commons. So just to let you know, go to commons.erau.edu for recordings of this podcast that we're talking right now. So, all right. Thank you, Laura, again. Greatly appreciated. Yes, thank you for your input and wisdom as far as open access goes.
Thanks, David. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. And that's our show for today. Again, I would like to thank Joanne Evanoff, my boss, the Associate Library Director for Technologies and Information Resources here at the Hazy Library, and Sarah Thomas, the Hazy Library Library Director, for their support of this podcasting endeavor. Remember, scholarly communication continues to be all about the ongoing great conversation in academia. This conversation is in journal articles, newspapers, on the radio, on social media, at conferences, in the hallway, and anywhere else scholarly discourse happens. It's dynamic and vibrant. It's also happening constantly. This is especially true with Scholarly Commons, and your contributions to it matter. This is David Ehrensperger signing off. In the context of scholarly communication, until next time, by all means, stay connected.